it's far more impactful than waiting 18 months to say, oh, we finally implemented a new customer experience strategy and it's working.
Hello and welcome to a whole new episode of Engati CX. I'm your host Chandni, and we're really glad to have all of you join us today. On this show, we talk to CX and tech experts from around the world. We explore, uncover, and share fresh insights on creating experiences that your customers will remember and look forward to. Engati is the world's leading multilingual, no-code digital CX platform available across 14 channels with 45,000 solutions created across 186 countries in every domain and use case. Engati has also been recognized as a top platform by Inc. magazine, Tech World, CIO magazine, and many others. We run the Engati blog, video channel, and the Engati CX podcast, receiving upwards of 400,000 visitors annually. And now for our guest, Bob Azman is the Chief Customer Officer and Customer Experience Consultant at Innovative CX Solutions. He's an innovative and visionary executive with an exemplary record of providing customer-driven solutions to companies in high growth or rapidly changing business environments. Bob is an action-oriented, strategic thinker who drives substantial improvements in the overall customer experience through improved business and employee performance. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Hello, Chandni. Great to be here, and hello to all your listeners as well.
The pleasure is all ours. But before we dive into our interview with Bob, don't forget to subscribe to Engati and tap on the bell icon below to get access to exclusive content from thought leaders around the globe. So once again, welcome to the show, Bob, and diving right into the interview. My first question to you is, what is the colleague experience and how is it related to a customer experience?
Let me give you a little context first about the colleague experience. So we know we have customer experience, we know we have employee experience, but what I found is oftentimes we overlook the colleague experience, which is how we work together within an organization. So the customer experience obviously is focused towards our customers and clients. The employee experience is how do we hire, how do we onboard, how do we train, how do we create effective environments for our employees to be engaged and have good experiences with our companies. But the colleague experience says, how do we work together as departments? I'm sure all of your listeners have at one time or another commented about the silos in their organization or throwing work over the wall or barriers for getting things done, or perhaps they've complained that the sales organization over forecasts or the marketing doesn't deliver good promotions or operations doesn't have the product in stock, and all those kind of typical comments that are made about functions within an organization. That's really the colleague experiences. How do we work together across the various functions so that we can deliver a better customer and employee experience? And that's really the challenge that I've seen in a lot of organizations, is that ability to work together and to find ways to work together. So learning about other departments, learning what other departments do in the organization is always important. And then the last comment I'd make is, oftentimes I hear from departments that are not customer facing that they don't really impact the customer experience. So why should it matter? And of course, everybody in an organization does impact the experience, and consequently, they do contribute to it in one way or the other, whether they're behind the scenes or in the front line. And so knowing that helps create a better colleague environment as well.
I think a good employee will also help create a good experience for their customers at the end of the day.
We used to say happy employees make happy customers, but it's so much more than that, right? It's what defines a happy employee, what defines a happy customer, and hopefully the colleague experience contributes to that.
Absolutely, that's very well said, Bob. According to you, is there a scorecard for evaluating a company's customer centricity?
And this is a very hot topic, is how do we measure customer centricity? There are CX maturity curves that are out there that you can look at, descriptions of where you are at in the maturity curve. Well, how is your organization acting? There are leadership maturity curves to say, is your leadership engaged in customer experience? So there's kind of those evaluations that look at customer centricity. What I like to do is I like to do a little something different, and I use a 4-part scorecard. And it starts with the customer, but the other thing I found is many organizations are so focused on a customer satisfaction score, an NPS score, that they forget about all the other indicators of their business performance. And they're solely focused on one customer score and not how the business is operating. So I use this 4-part scorecard. The first is customer scorecard. So things like NPS or CXI or customer effort, those kinds of scores, CSAT, go into that quadrant. The next quadrant is operational, and these are in no particular order, but except for the one starting with customer. The next is operational. So how are you performing operationally within the organization? What's your on-time performance? How about your product quality? Measurements like that would be incorporated into that scorecard. And by the way, I only suggest you use 2 or 3 high-level measurements for the scorecard. You can always dig down into the other measurements, but don't fill these quadrants with 10 measurements in each one. The third one is financial. So how does your organization operate financially? Revenues, profit, revenue per employee, whatever those profit per customer, whatever those measurements are, again, that would fall into financial. And then the last one is employee. So are you measuring employee engagement? Are you measuring employee experience? What about employee retention? What about hiring? And those sorts of measurements. Again, just a couple in each quadrant. And so if you build out that scorecard, now you've got 4 areas, and you can look at the interdependency of each of those areas. So if CSAT is going down, what are your operational metrics doing? Are you having on-time delivery problems? Are you having quality problems? If your financials are not performing at a level they need to be, where should you be looking? Are employees not satisfied in the company? Are customers leaving? Is there high attrition rate for customers? So when you look at customer centricity, oftentimes you'll kind of go towards the typical measurements of NPS and CXI and the others. But what I like to do is look at an entire picture within the scorecard. How is our business operating? And are we really focused on the customer and what's happening?
Another thing is that these numbers come on later, but a high part of these numbers also depend upon the kind of interactions you have with your customers, right? I mean, if you have good interactions, you would have good numbers also. So how can organizations design customer interactions that exceed customer expectations?
One of the articles I've written in a chapter in one of the books I participated in focused on experience your customer's experience. And so often when I'm engaged with organizations, either as a full-time employee or as a consultant, leaders beyond the front line don't know what their customers go through to do business with them. And I think this is a real challenge for organizations because, I mean, how often have you gone on a website and it doesn't work, or the links are broken, or it takes you to the wrong place, or you can't order, or the promotion codes don't work? Or how often have you been engaged with a salesperson that's not properly trained? Or how often have you been engaged and when you've ordered a product and it comes packaged poorly, or the quality isn't where it needs to be? Those are all things that if leaders were engaged and experienced their customers' experience, they'd understand what the problems are. And so I think one of the challenges for organizations is to understand that, and that's a path towards exceeding expectations. Now, Of course, they certainly have to know what those expectations are. They have to be in touch with their customers. They have to have a strong voice of the customer initiative in place so they hear the customer. But the other way to do that is to actually follow your orders through the system, or if you're a service provider, follow the service offerings that you have to see how customers are reacting to that. I've seen this done effectively in a number of organizations where they deep dive into this experience with people that aren't typically in the experience. So just like we talked about before with the colleague experience, this is engaging executives and leaders and department heads into actually processing orders or delivering service and seeing what the experience is. And I found it to be a huge shift in the attitude of those leaders to say, I can't believe we're putting our customers through this. We have to make changes. And therefore, they're exceeding customer expectations. So that whole mantra of being easy to do business with and exceeding customer expectations, I think starts with clearly understanding your customer through a voice of customer, but also in experiencing what they're going through on a regular basis.
And I think feedback and voice of customer programs play a very important role here to understand what they're going through.
One of the things I would add to that, there's a very good comment, if you get the data, do something with it. So oftentimes companies have great voice of customer programs, but they don't do anything with the data. And so I think that's so key is if you're going to collect this data, be prepared to do something with it. And I've always used a process of a closed loop system, gather the information from your customer, look for the themes that are developing, themes like poor quality, slow deliveries, bad service, whatever. Look for those themes and then deep dive into the themes and find out where it's broken and then feed it back to those departments that are getting that less than good feedback. Say we've got to do something to change, make the changes, then measure it and hear the voice of the customer. So you've got a closed loop system in place.
How important do you think are these voice of customer programs? Should everybody follow it?
I do think it's very important to be in touch with your customers. I have a little bit of a different approach. You have to scale them accordingly. So does a small organization really need to do an NPS study if they have 1,000 customers, let's say? They could probably be better off in simply being in regular contact with those customers on an annual basis or dividing it up among people to contact them. I would say there's a tiered approach where you want to talk to your biggest and your best customers frequently enough to understand their expectations. And maybe customers at the other end of the scale that maybe only buy from you once a year, or maybe they're something you want to do a survey with once in a while to make sure you're in tune with them, but also not over survey or overseek their expectations and believe that a person that buys one time a year from you has the same voice as a person that buys 12 times a year from you. So I think there's balance there in the voice of customer programs. And it's easy to get caught up in the latest article on a VOC program and I have to do this. And I've been asked that many times, but let's put it in balance and let's gear it and scale it to your organization and create a program that's unique to you. Again, so you can use the data you get from that voice of customer program.
So moving on to my next question, how do you define a customer experience quality framework that evaluates customer perception?
I think the key here is customer perception. And that's what I find intriguing about your question. So oftentimes we look at the measurements and we don't really think about the perception. Sometimes we used to call it EQ or the emotional quotient versus the IQ or the intelligent quotient. Customer perception is becoming ever more present. How did you feel about that experience? Question I think is really important. The customer effort score kind of goes towards that as well, because that says how much effort did I have to put forth in order to interact with your company? That begins to get at perception and the importance of perception. The example I've used quite a bit when talking about this whole concept of customer perception is if I'm out to dinner on a, by myself, maybe making a business trip when we could make more frequent business trips. And, and I may be sitting at a table by myself and the service isn't as good as I would have hoped. It probably doesn't impact me that much. I mean, I might be dissatisfied, but I'm by myself. I might be working or reading, not paying that much attention to the service. On the other hand, if I'm out with, let's say, my significant other on an important anniversary or birthday or celebration, and the service isn't that good, I have a different perception of that. Now it becomes more emotional. I'm not feeling good about it because I wanted this to be a perfect celebration. And so we may measure a customer satisfaction and say, oh, look, they're satisfied. But the customer's perception of our organization, the customer perception of our quality, of meeting their expectations, of exceeding the experience could be dramatically different. They might be satisfied, but they're not necessarily happy or feeling good about the interaction. Sure, you got me the product. Sure, it works, but boy, it took longer than I expected, or the instructions weren't as good as I thought they should be. I had that experience just this morning where this highly rated piece of equipment, I was putting it together, and the instructions were to me very, very hard to follow and shouldn't have been. And so while I had a great perception about the product, I had less of a perception about the instructions. And those are things that really impact the quality of the experience that customers have with it.
And I think that's a very important fact that a lot of businesses should start considering while making their product or, making changes in their products and services.
Right.
Very well.
I mean, you really need to ask the why behind the score. So if it's satisfaction, to your point, it's really asking about the why. Why did they give us that score? And I've seen some surveys where they ask questions like, how does this make you feel? Does it make you feel like a diamond or a rock, right? And so you have to say, well, actually, and most people would say a diamond is shiny and expensive and it makes me feel good, whereas a rock is a rock. So I've seen some surveys out there where you say, well, I felt like a rock. Well, that tells you the perception of the customer, right? And they didn't say a diamond.
That's a really good example. Moving on to my next question. How would businesses define their success and outline what growth they need to achieve for their goals?
I think it goes back to my scorecard, but of course the scorecard is the result. So you need to set clear and precise goals at the beginning. And first and foremost, I think you have to have an effective business strategy, a brand strategy, if you will. Then you can align the experience strategy to it, and the operation strategy and marketing strategy and so forth can align to that. So having a strong business/brand strategy, I think, is where it needs to start. And then as you align these other goals and objectives, you're always constantly looking at that strategy. Do our goals and objectives support that strategy? And including things like customer experience is part of the strategic plan, I think, is really important, because then it ties everybody to the objectives of the performance of the organization. Keeping CX out here by itself as an initiative doesn't effectively get it part of the business. And so if you're constantly thinking, oh, I have to include customer experience in my strategic objectives, then you really haven't integrated it into the fabric and culture of your organization. So that's an indicator that businesses need to incorporate this, not have it be a program, but have it be a part of the objectives. Now, in that area, I try to encourage organizations, you don't need 10, 15 objectives. Try to narrow it down to 3 to 5 objectives. This is, of course, at the highest level, 3 to 5 objectives that you can achieve. Of those, one is customer experience or customer operating principles and so forth, somewhere in that category. And then the others are financial, operational, employees. So if you looked at the scorecard categories, that's where I'd say you could start with the business strategies. Design objectives and goals for each one of those 4. And that should help then align the organization to the overall business strategy that then can help you achieve your goals for the year and beyond.
This is really well put up. So, before we wrap up with the interview, Bob, are there any sound bites that you'd like to leave our audience with?
A couple have come to mind. I want to emphasize this whole concept of experiencing your experience and making sure that your customers' experience, so that your listeners know it's really important to stay in touch with that. The other thing I would say is you don't need to, I call it boil the ocean. You don't need to boil the ocean to try to achieve some of these goals. I've often found that if you can get some quick wins that builds momentum in the organization, it's far more impactful than waiting 18 months to say, oh, we finally implemented a new customer experience strategy and it's working. If you can say, we started today and 30 days from now, something really good happened, and it doesn't have to be big, it just means that customers recognize that quality was improving or the experience was better. Any kind of uptick in a customer's viewpoint, that I would celebrate that. And I'd celebrate the win and I'd celebrate the momentum and then say, now what do we do from here? And you can build on that momentum. A person that runs a marathon doesn't go out on their first day and say, okay, I'm going to run 26 miles today. They start running a few miles a day and building their endurance and building their capabilities up in order to run that marathon. That's the same way with customer experience is, if you need to improve your customer experience, and I've been asked this a lot of times where CEOs will say to me, you have to fix our customer service department because our customer experience is bad. No, it's not your customer service that needs fixing. It may, but that's not the source of the problem. If that's, the source of your problem is upstream or downstream from customer service. But if you're going to fix your entire customer experience, build that capability, build the momentum so you can run that marathon over time and continue to run it and build those building blocks that will make you successful. So to me, it's celebrate, look for the quick wins, celebrate them, and build your momentum, and you'll be very successful in my experience.
Thank you so much, Bob, for giving us your time. Your insight was really valuable, and I know our audience is going to enjoy this interview.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I've had a lot of fun. You asked great questions.
So we'll be back with a new episode and a brand new expert soon. So stay tuned, and we'll see you around for the next one.